Welcome back to the Metal Exchange. Justin and Chris here with you for another week. Last week we discussed prog metal royalty, discussing Images and Words by Dream Theater. This week, the origins of thrash with Metallica's Ride the Lightning. Chris, my man, how are you doing?
It's nice that we can finally shine a spotlight on this very little-known band, Metallica.
I know it's been a long time coming, but I'm happy we get to discuss it. I know you were away this week. I suspect you haven't had a lot of chance to or a lot of time to catch up on some new stuff that came out, but I'm going to help you out because I got a number of things I want to talk about in your absence. One of my favorite bands out of Canada, Ascendia, who released a phenomenal album a couple of years ago, just released their new single entitled This War. I posted it on our social media pages throughout the week. Definitely worth checking out. It seems like they're going in a little bit of a different direction, but I'm very curious to hear what this album is going to sound like. So best of luck to them. Threshold, an album who we have discussed in the archives, and a band who I think we can both say we are big fans of, released a new single called Silenced. This song is awesome. It's very much in the vein, I think, of the last album. Very introspective lyrics, really catchy chorus. Exactly, I think, what you'd expect from Threshold at this point in their career, but very good listen. And a band out of Houston, Texas called Anova Skyway. They're kind of an up-and-coming band, very new. They kind of blend alternative rock and prog rock. I think they lean a little more prog rock, but it's definitely more accessible than some of the quirkier stuff that's out there. They released a new EP called Reset. It's 6 songs. It is phenomenal, and I cannot stress this enough. If this was a full-length album, it would probably be in my top 5 albums that I've heard this year because I've played this thing on repeat all week. Definitely worth checking out. I'll post a song or two this week from the EP. Just really catchy stuff. They remind me of a band from New York called Jolly that was around about 10 or 12 years ago. They haven't done much since then, maybe about 6-7 years ago at this point, but very catchy but quirky prog rock. I think you'll definitely enjoy it. So like I said, I'll post a song this week.
Very cool. I just had noticed, like you said, I was away, but I noticed there was a couple other songs that got dropped that I still need to listen to, but Voyager has a new single called Submarine. I believe they have a new music video to go along with that. Soilwork dropped another single from their upcoming album, Overgiven Hittin', and that song's called Dreams of Nowhere. And I was curious, have you had a chance to hear the new Megadeth single? I was interested to see that Ice-T is featured on it.
Yeah, I gotta be honest with you. That first single blew me away. I didn't think they were capable of recreating a sound from Rust in Peace, but it was damn near close. This single is really good too. Obviously it's got the Ice-T influence, and you can imagine what that is going to sound like, but it's a really good song. The guitar work is just the best guitar work they've done probably in 30 something years. This album has real potential, and I never thought I'd be saying that about a Megadeth album at this point, but it's intriguing. And what's interesting is they even had like the old Vic Rattlehead skull with the hooks in the mouth, which was something they had on their first album, at this point, almost 40 years ago. They seem like they're trying to go back to their roots on this one, and I am really intrigued. I'm all in. I mean, the vocals are never going to be revolutionary, right? But the guitar work and the drumming is just so melodic and catchy and fast and aggressive that it's like, I'm all in. I have to hear this album. I'm looking forward to it immensely.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing this track. And then there was one other thing that I noticed. Oh, yes, Nordic Union released another single from their upcoming album, Animalistic, and that song is called This Means War. And so that's another one I got to listen to. That's Eric Martinson and Ronnie Atkins. So I'll be doing some catching up this week for sure. And then by the time you talk to me on the next episode, I'll be all caught up.
Kudos. I hope you enjoyed the vacation. It's funny. I can't believe that here we are doing over 100 episodes, and we have not even like mentioned this band. I know we've talked about other bands. Maybe we haven't done a deep dive, but we really haven't even talked about Metallica, which is kind of nuts when you think about it. But here we are. And ironically enough, we're celebrating Ride the Lightning today, which came out July 27th, 1984. So it's 38 years ago this week that this album came out. Um, you know, where do you start with this band? When was the first time you even heard a Metallica song? Was it Enter Sandman on the radio, or was it some other way?
Oh my god! I'm not even sure. It goes back to before I really started diving into like progressive and power metal, but probably not too far before. I had a cousin who's a year younger than me, and he was always like a hip hop guy, but he went through this very short metal phase, and then when he was out of it, um, he gave me the Black Album and Kill 'Em All, which were like, if you could pick like two like not opposite, but just two very different Metallica albums. It was like their very raw debut versus like their first super polished, almost like commercial release. It was interesting. I never really got into Kill 'Em All, but I really liked the Black Album. I thought all the songs were really good, but it would be you and Nick particularly who kind of got me more into the Puppets, Lightning, Justice era. And I remember we were at the Wall in Lake Success, and I said, I'm going to buy a Metallica album. And I asked you, which one should I get? And you said you should get Injustice for All. So that was not counting Load and Reload, I think that was my third classic Metallica album. And then I got the other two a bit later on. But this was really like my first time really listening to Ride the Lightning start to finish, like a number of times. And so it was a cool experience, and I'm looking forward to talking about it with you.
Yeah, it's funny for me. I think I had mentioned this. I had heard, I was a big Tool fan around 95, 96. We obviously discussed Tool in the archives as well. And it was about that time that I started getting into Metallica as well. And when Load had come out, they were getting some radio play for King Nothing and stuff like that. And I thought it was actually a really good song for what it was. And there were some other tracks on Load and Reload, which stand up, believe it or not, on an album that may not be as influential or as impactful, looking back, as an album like Ride the Lightning. But when I first heard that stuff, I just dove all in, and I started picking up every single album in the back catalog. And I'm so glad that I did, obviously, because those first, I guess we'll say those first four releases up through the Black Album, but before they get to the Black Album, were just some of the most influential and impactful and commercially successful albums for a band who was not getting any radio play at the time. But Kill 'Em All, Ride the Lightning, Puppets, and Justice, those four albums, I mean, what a way to start their career. And then obviously from there, they would kind of go off in a number of different directions. And the one thing that's undeniable is that their success is unparalleled. I mean, they still sell out every show that they play, no matter what the size of the venue. It could be a football stadium, it could be a basketball arena. They're selling out, and they're probably doing multiple nights because they are that big and that impactful. But back here in those early days of 1984, they were not getting any help from the radio. They were like an underground sensation, but the groundswell was so big that the train was pulling out of the station. And me being as cheap as I was back when I was 15, when I was getting my hands on these albums in like 1997, I didn't want to spend $18 at the Wall and buy the album. So I had a kid in my chemistry class that sat next to me, and he literally burned me copies of all of these albums for $10 a piece. So when I first got Ride the Lightning, it's because another kid, Justin, had burned me all of these CDs, and eventually I would obviously go and buy them. But I just had to hear this music. And I remember getting Justice, Puppets, and Ride the Lightning all at the same time for $30. And I just played them on repeat in like mid 1997, and that's all I would listen to. And then I would obviously gravitate away from them and listen to all this other stuff. But my God, what an indoctrination this was. And then I wound up buying Kill 'Em All, and shortly thereafter, I wound up having everything they had recorded up until and through Reload.
That's yeah. I was kind of curious your Metallica history, because I remember you when we first became friends that you had a few Megadeth albums and a few Metallica albums, and it. I remember. I think we went to. I forgot what store. We were going somewhere and we were listening to Master of Puppets in Nick's van. And I remember just thinking to myself, or it might have been Ride the Lightning. I forgot one or the other, or maybe Justice. It was one of those three. And I was thinking to myself, like, wow, like this is so different from what I had heard on the Black Album and Kill 'Em All. And then like Load and Reload, obviously, because, you know, those 90s Metallica albums were so like heavily produced and just very polished. And I think that like, I never really quite understood the hate that the Black Album got, but maybe it's because I listened to it first, and so it kind of felt like going back and listening to the older albums. It felt like to me that there was kind of like the natural progression of a band that kind of was like breaking through in the '80s, and then you know all of a sudden they had a big time producer that wanted to come in and kind of give them a little bit of polish and kind of take them to the next level. And it's so interesting to me that like those diehard fans kind of crap on the Black Album. You know, little did they know what was to come with Load and Reload, which they would hate even more, and then Saint Anger, which they would loathe. So it's interesting, like the you know, I guess hindsight being 2020. I kind of always lumped the Black Album in with these, especially the three after Kill 'Em All, as like those four really quintessential Metallica albums.
And for me, I always kind of cut it off with Justice, because for me, the way I looked at it was such a stark contrast to those albums that came before it. It did not have the heavily produced sound. It didn't have the radio ballad, you know, like Nothing Else Matters. It just was so different that if you evaluated the albums for what they were so diametrically opposed to one another that it was almost like once Justice ended and they started recording the Black Album and they bring in the orchestra and they do all this, you know, stuff to kind of appeal to the masses. And let's be clear, it worked, because that album, I think, is still on the charts 30 years later. There was something that changed, and not necessarily for the worse, just different. But if you were a hardcore fan and you were listening to Master of Puppets back in 1986, I can understand why 5 years later you could not believe that they had done a complete 180 with their sound.
Yeah, I mean, like Enter Sandman and Nothing Else Matters were probably their two biggest hits from this album, and they're like real commercial hits. But I mean, to me, like the rest of the album, while being more polished than the previous album, I mean, there was some good heavy metal / hard rock / thrash metal songs. Like, I don't think there's any bad songs on the Black Album, whereas I might be able to say that like Load and Reload have some songs that I probably would never go back and listen to. And man, I popped on Frantic from Saint Anger recently, which is, I think, considered the best song on the album. It's the opening track, and just that drum sound, it just pierces through your head. It is so like, I don't know what Lars was thinking with that, just like shrill, like, oh my God. It just, I mean, it takes away any enjoyment you could potentially have listening to it. And I remember when Death Magnetic and Hardwired came out later on, those were the most recent two full-length albums. I was thinking to myself, like, this is a little bit more kind of Metallica going back a little bit to their roots while still maintaining that kind of polish. But it's so interesting to me, like how I think we maybe in passing talked about how like Guns N' Roses was this unbelievable phenomenon that, when you think about it, like was such a short, for a band that has such credentials, they existed in such a short window. And I think of like this like glory era of Metallica, and it's kind of the same thing. Like it lasted about 5 years. Like, at least according to the people that kind of set sail after Justice and once like Black Album came out, and they were like, all right, well, that's it. Metallica was a band that released 4 albums and then disappeared after the 80s,
But the
which
irony is they acknowledge they disappear after Justice, but when they play a show in 2022, who's there? The fans that were listening to them in 1985.
I
Because
know. I mean, you don't sell out arenas without like somebody caring.
right, and that's the
So
thing, and like people, it's just that these albums were so iconic, and I think the Guns N' Roses example is great. After Use Your Illusion 2 came out, many would argue they haven't done anything good since, but yet they're still selling out football stadiums, 80,000 people.
I do not ever want to hear a negative word spoken about the spaghetti incident. I just want to say that.
Yeah, we'll definitely not cover that anytime soon, but
That'll be after the Saint Anger episode,
which has been requested, but we'll hopefully not get there for a while either. It's just a fascinating time, and I'll tell you a bit about why I chose this particular album. Just going back into my crazy fandom from 25 years ago, I always thought that the debut Kill 'Em All was this well constructed thrash demo that they had put out. Production left a little something to be desired, but it was that raw sound and the potential that was kind of oozing through a lot of those songs, like Whiplash and the Four Horsemen and stuff like that, which I can see why this became like an underground sensation. But what Ride the Lightning has that I don't think Puppets or Justice have is the blend of that Kill 'Em All raw aggression with the lack of polish that they put on with Puppets and Justice. In other words, Ride the Lightning still has a very, very raw sound to it, whereas Puppets sonically sounds pristine because they had already had money behind them and they were able to kind of do a lot in the studio that maybe they weren't able to do, just 2 years prior. But this album was really the bridge between the early we're getting on our feet and we're a live band and a band that would ultimately be known for the following 2 studio albums. I thought this was the perfect album that kind of bridged the gap, and the upgrade in songwriting on this particular album is very noticeable because you have some songs here that are just all-time classics, but even some of the I don't want to say lesser known, but like lesser talked about tracks here are just really well constructed. And that's kind of what I wanted to get into. And that's why I chose this, because admittedly, I think it's my favorite album at this point by the band. And I wanted to have an excuse to go back and listen to it.
I think that's a good, some like good reasoning. I always found that while I do agree with you that like there was definitely a increase in production value as these albums go forward. To me, I felt like this was a big step up from Kill 'Em All. I never really like got into it. Like, I like Whiplash and I like Four Horsemen and some of like the real like ones that the band still plays live to this day. But I just felt like this was like, and you said songwriting, that's a big part of it. Like the songwriting, they're starting to kind of branch out into not just being a full-on thrash band. You have a little bit of kind of mellow, almost ballady portions. There's more melodic lines, and I'll get to. There's a song in particular that I want to talk about as far as like where you're seeing like a side of Metallica that's a little bit more melodic and not as much just like straight up like angry, raw thrash metal. There's this album ends with a 9-minute instrumental. I mean, like it's a really cool progression in this, like what will turn into this monster that's known as Metallica. But yeah, I agree. This is a really good choice. And I definitely would like to do deep dives into, the other 3 of the first 4 albums at some point, because I think they all merit discussion. But yeah, I like kind of went into this knowing half the songs well, and I really enjoyed listening to this. I thought that this is like I kind of forgot how good this band was, and there's still a Force Live, like you mentioned, and I still think that there's songs on their last two albums that are really good. And there's songs on Load and Reload that I really like. And I mentioned before, I like the Black album as well. Um, although it might not be considered like a legitimate thrash metal album. Kind of the same way, with, we're going to have probably parallel Megadeth a lot on this episode, but kind of like how Megadeth with Euthanasia kind of wanted to try to go a different way and not be as thrashy. And I think a lot of people consider that and Risk and Cryptic Writings kind of like their little foray into trying to be a little bit more commercially successful.
Sure.
But also I feel like Megadeth kind of went back to the well, like we were talking about early on in the episode. And the difference for me and why I'm always going to be a Megadeth guy over Metallica is that, like I said, Metallica like peaked in the 80s, and like they never really, as far as like song quality goes, they never really came back to what they did in the 80s. And I don't even think they really even tried all that hard to do that. But Megadeth, I think, has consistently released like, good thrash albums through the years. Risk was probably like that was like their big dip, their Saint Anger, if you will. Like it was just the one that like nobody seemed to enjoy, even though there are songs that I happen to quite like from Risk. It's just not a well-received Megadeth album, but they would come back after that and be like, all right, that didn't work. Let's just go back to the thrash thing. And so it's really interesting. And there's, I saw at least one of these songs on this album has Dave Mustaine as a writing credit. I'll have to pull up the booklet again, which I thought was interesting that there's still a little bit of his influence kind of hanging around. It looks like Ride the Lightning. He has a songwriting credit on, which is,
and Call of Cthulhu as well. He actually has writing credits on two of these songs. And what's interesting is this would obviously be the last album he would get writing credits on, but he was, these songs were being worked on, I guess, around the same time that, he was in the band just 2 years prior. So they threw him a bone with those two. In many ways, I think they're two of the best songs on the album, which is a testament to his songwriting. I will never get up here and say that Dave Mustaine is my favorite vocalist of all time, or that I think he's a phenomenal frontman, but he's a great songwriter. And the reality is, even when they were going through that foray that you talked about, kind of deviating from, the Rust in Peace sound or the Peace Cell sound, Cryptic Writings is a phenomenal album, and it's actually one that I think we should talk about because there are some amazing songs on there. And although Risk never resonated with me, I only liked one song on the album.
Was it Crush 'Em?
Yeah, that was definitely not it. And I've had many debates with Mike about that one. But Cryptic Writings is a gem, and I would actually put it up there as one of their best albums just from a musical standpoint. Now, I'm not saying it's a thrash metal album. I'm not putting it up there with Rust in Peace, but I will say I like it. I like it a lot. And I think that their sound actually started to change with Countdown to Extinction, which was just such a stark contrast to Rust in Peace that had come out, 2 or 3 years prior. It seemed like everybody around 1992, 1991, 1992, 1993 were starting to deviate from that 80s sound. Megadeth would go back to it. Metallica would kind of dip their toe in the pool, but yes, I think we can agree. The heyday.
When we talked about Pearl Jam's 10 album, I think that time period where that grunge and alternative movement was changing the whole musical landscape in the U.S., it seemed like bands like Metallica and Megadeth like felt like they needed to do something to kind of keep up and not get lost in the death of metal that kind of seemed to happen.
Yeah,
I'm guessing that had something to do with it.
I could not agree more. But with that all said and that backdrop, let's get into it. I'm sure everybody knows, but it's James Hetfield on vocals and guitar, Kirk Hammett on lead guitar, Cliff Burton, rest in peace, on bass, and Lars Ulrich on drums. This is their classic lineup, and obviously they would go through a couple of other bass players in the years to come, but the core of this band has remained the same since 1983, really. I mean, once they figured out the lineup, they kind of went with it, for the most part. The album starts with an absolute banger of a song. And when I say banger, I'm talking about a song that when you first hear it, you're just like, what is this? Because I remember the first time I played the album and I heard Fight Fire with Fire, I was blown away. And in retrospect, I don't know that I love it as much as I did back when I first heard it, because it's a little repetitive in my opinion, and just an onslaught of sound in your face. But I thought this was just mind blowing, and I used to adore the hell out of it. The intro is really cool. It's different. It's again, that uptick in songwriting with the what sounds like an acoustic guitar at the beginning before an absolute explosion of thrash metal. The riff that kicks this song off is, I mean, second to none. It's just unlike anything you were hearing in 1984. But at this point, I would say that my favorite part of the song is actually the instrumental section, because I think that the chorus and the verses are a little bland in the pantheon of Metallica songs. But the solos in that instrumental section are just fantastic, and I love that explosion at the end, which is just like, strap in, because you're ready. You're basically in for about 45 or 50 minutes of absolute thrash metal mayhem.
I completely agree with everything you just said, and I think this was by far the right choice to open the album with, because I think it just hooks you in right away, and I think that Metallica said, if I wanted to hook you, you'd be hooked. So they hooked you right away, and I agree. Like, it is kind of a repetitive and boring kind of, not boring, but just repetitive kind of verse and chorus or whatever. But I mean, that riff that just pervades throughout the whole song, it's just so energetic, and so like, it just really pulls you in. And like you said, like you go into the soloing, and it's just like, all right, let's see what these guys can do. And they just really tear it up. And it's definitely not my favorite song on the album, but boy, I don't know that I would want this album to start with any other song. Like, this is such a perfect way to just kick things off.
And I would imagine that the band themselves had to be at least happy or onto some sort of a formula here, because when they would start Master of Puppets with Battery, it was the same type of thing. I mean, it's just an absolute onslaught of a song to start.
Yeah. And same with Blackened too on
yeah.
This,
Yeah. They there was a formula here, I think, but they definitely stuck to it and did it well. They go into the second track, which is the self-titled Ride the Lightning track, one of the longer songs on the album. It's a little over 6.5 minutes. As we said, this was one of the ones that Mustaine got writing credits on. What are your thoughts about this one?
I think that this song is better than Fight Fire with Fire, or at least I like it more. It's again, you have this just riff that just continues on throughout the song, and I think it's got a catchier chorus, the catchier verses. It's a little bit longer, like you mentioned, but I like this song a bit better than Fight Fire with Fire. I feel like we're like increasing our song quality as we move forward. But this is a really good tune, and it's kind of like, I always like that Metallica's big three, if you would, albums have a title track, and this is a great song for the title track for Ride the Lightning. If it's like the anthem of the album, just a very enjoyable thrash metal tune. I like this one a lot.
This is arguably one of, if not their most underrated song in their entire catalog. And it never gets mentioned with Master of Puppets as a song. They rarely play it live, but it is so catchy and so melodic, but at the same time so raw and so thrashy. I just love it. I think that the young James Hetfield here sounds phenomenal, and obviously his vocals, I don't think anyone would say are again spectacular, but he's very good at what he does. And I think that when he had that young, energetic, explosive sound to his voice, you saw it on full display here. And I just think that the diversity of this song speaks to the songwriting. And I think that there are other songs that are potentially catchier. I'm sure we're going to talk about those momentarily, but this has one of the most like extended emotional guitar solos that's in their entire catalog. And I love the fact that it kind of gradually picks up speed as you go along. I am a closet fanboy of this song, and I think it's actually maybe the best song on the album, and I'm actually going to make it my song of the week.
Well, it's time to come out of the closet.
Yeah.
Man, I just had something on the tip of my tongue and I just lost it. I will say that this is okay. Just came back to me. This is a band where at this time I feel like everybody is equally contributing. As far as like you have this like the bass really shines through on certain songs with Cliff. The drumming obviously is a big part of Metallica's, legend with Lars, and the guitar work is just fantastic. And like you said, James Hetfield, it's kind of like, I call it like Bruce Springsteen, like the guy is, no one's ever going to call him like a classically trained vocalist. But like, there's just, you just couldn't imagine somebody else being the singer. Same with Dave Mustaine. Like he's just, again, it's a different kind of raspy, kind of raw voice, but it just fits with everything else that's going on. It's just a really great collection of just awesome thrash metal musicians coming together here.
Yeah, they were hitting it at the right time for sure. And now you start getting into some of these real quote unquote classic tracks with like a song like For Whom the Bell Tolls. I played this song on repeat when I got that burned copy of this album. I could not get enough of this song. I don't know that I would say it's my favorite song now, but my God, what a phenomenal ride, no pun intended, that they take you on. Very good lyrics, fantastic live song, and I think now is as good a time as any to talk about when we saw them in concert, because I remember jumping in my dad's car with you and a bunch of other guys going to Giant Stadium to see Metallica in concert. It was my first concert. It was on July 17th, 1998, 24 years ago. And I got to be honest with you, that whole experience, seeing Metallica live, watching people tailgate in the parking lot of this gigantic football stadium, I was blown away. And it would
watching grown men curse in the bathroom during the acoustic set.
Yeah, exactly. And like, what the fuck is this? I have to be honest with you. That was a formative experience for me, and it became the first of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of shows that I would go on to see. But that first concert was something I will never forget, and credit to Metallica. We were sitting so far away on the other side of the stadium, all the way up top, probably because it was the only tickets we could afford. But it was still a transformative experience. I think that they would like hit a snare drum and we'd hear it about 6 minutes later based on how far the seats were, but it was still such a cool experience.
If there was a Bon Jovi concert going on at Continental Airlines Arena, we would have been closer to that show than we were to the Metallica show.
I think I just heard Richie Sambora. It was really it was wild, but it was definitely something I'll never forget. They played For Whom the Bell Tolls, and I marked out. I thought it was the greatest thing. And I love how at certain parts they just kind of isolate the drum sound for like a split second before they go back into the riff.
Yep.
What an awesome idea. And you mentioned the Cliff Burton bass lines. they jump out on this song, but they really jump out when they play this song live. I've heard bootlegs from back in 1984 and 1985. This is an all-time classic. The wild guitars at the end, the way this song just kind of goes out is just perfect. It's just a perfect song and could easily be my track of the week. I'm not obviously I'm sticking with Ride, but this is a classic.
Well, it's my song of the week, so there you go. This was the one song, well, not the one song. This is the first song I ever heard from this album, and I'll tell you why. I had the Woodstock 94 soundtrack. I don't know if you call it a soundtrack. It was like a 2-disc live compilation, and this was the song that they chose for Metallica's their entry on what I think a lot of people consider a really classic Metallica live set. It was right before Load and Reload would come out, so they basically had those first 5 albums to choose from. It's probably not terribly different from the live shit box set as far as what songs they had to choose from, because I think that had come out right around the same time. But so I was always very enamored with this song, and it just was one of those songs that never fell out of favor with me. And like the way that it starts out with the bell, much like Hell's Bells did for AC/DC.
Yes.
It's not just a song, it's kind of like an experience, and they're adding some more layers to it by having that bell toll at the beginning. And I always think about how we would compare the riff from the Final Fantasy VII battle music, that dun, 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 and like I remember Nick being like, wow, they stole the riff from For Whom the Bell Tolls to make battle music in Final Fantasy VII. So I always think about that whenever I hear that riff, the Nobuo Uematsu, Kirk Hammett
tribute.
Yeah, tribute riff. But yeah, I mean, this is just one of those songs that, much like, Battery and Master of Puppets and Creeping Death, it just never seems to get old. They're just such a classic, like energetic song. And it's probably wouldn't you say it's the most popular song from this album?
I think it's either this or Creeping Death, both of which are just staples in their live set. I don't know the last time that they've played a show and not played those two songs. And I think you can make an argument depending on mood for which one is quote unquote better, because they are two of the better songs on the album, and quite frankly, two of the better songs ever. I go back and forth, but yeah, I remember hearing that Woodstock recording after the fact and trying to track down that album just because I thought that rendition of Bells was so good.
Yeah. Oh, I can hear Hetfield in my head just being like, I hope you brought your Metallica energy, and like the crowd didn't like respond loudly enough, and he just goes, "Well, are you fucking sure?" So I always just hear that in my head.
It's so funny. And then you get to their first, a true ballad, I guess, with Fade to Black. Obviously, a very, very emotional trip and song, obviously about suicide. This is a very, very deep song for a bunch of 20-somethings, I think. The verses are great, but what really stands out to me is the second half of this song, where it kind of just picks up. And the last 3 minutes, God, the riff that kicks off that final verse is just so iconic. I think, and nobody's ever said this to me, but when I go back and I listen to In My Darkest Hour by Megadeth, which would come out in 1988, I don't think that song comes out unless there is a fade to black, because I always thought it was constructed in the same way with the same lyrical themes and stuff like that. Very, very interesting stuff. But this was also a very accessible song, Fade to Black, whereas some of the other stuff may be a little abrasive for many. I could hear people that may not be quote unquote metal fans listening to Fade to Black and being like, you know what, this rocks. I can get down with this.
Well, yeah, and I think part of it is because, like, while you would think based on the first few minutes that it's like a full on ballad.
Right.
I mean, it starts to, there's a lot of heavy parts to it. And I've been meaning to ask you while listening to this album, would you consider this like the first ever thrash ballad?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I'm not going to say I'm an absolute expert, but if you listen to early Slayer, you're not hearing any of this stuff. Obviously, Megadeth wouldn't have a ballad for some time after this as well, if memory serves. Let's put it this way. If it wasn't the first, it was probably the best of its time for sure.
Yeah. And I just like that, like, and Metallica would do this again in the future. But like it's towards the end, they're just like, all right, enough. We need to kind of start rocking out again. And so there's some really, like I said, some like really heavy guitar riffs, and it's I feel like it's constructed similarly to One, which would come out on Justice for All, where it's kind of chill at the beginning, and then it just like One's I think is even heavier in the second half of the song. But I mean, sure. It's kind of the same where it's like, it's going to be mellow to start, and then we're going to kind of gradually pick things up. And so this was another, probably one of the 3 or 4 songs that I knew really well going into this, and definitely holds up. And it's a meaty song. It comes in at almost 7 minutes, but never a dull moment. I don't think.
Yeah, and what a way to end side A of the album, right? I mean, just kind of go out with a bang. Side B, kicks off with Trapped Under Ice, which is another really, really, really fast and heavy track. If there was any wonder, could they do it again, to kind of kick things off when you change the side of the record? I think the answer is yes. This is another underrated track, and a song that if I was seeing the band, I would just kill to see this live. I feel like this song live would be absolutely perfect. Solid, straightforward verses, decent chorus, but the shredding in the middle of the song is just so sick. And the melodic bridge is another highlight for me. I think it's just a really good start to the second half of the album. I don't know that it's as iconic as Fight Fire with Fire, but I think it's a underrated track that's well placed on this album.
Yeah, well put. It's probably my least favorite song on the album, but that's really not a knock, because like I think all the songs on this album are really good at worst. So I just thought that this was kind of like Fight Fire with Fire. It was a little repetitive, and like the chorus I don't think was as catchy as some of the other songs, but I would put it like a shade under Fight Fire with Fire for me personally. But again, like there's really not a bad song on this album, and I think this is, like you said, a really good way to kind of kick off side B, if you will. And I didn't really think of it that way when I was listening to it. I was listening to it like I would a CD, but you're right. Like this is, I really wonder how much stock bands put into like where a song landed on an album that has 2 sides, whether it be on a cassette or a record. But if that wasn't any consideration here, it seems like they tried to do the same thing they did on side A, where just kick things off with a really energetic and fast paced tune.
Yeah, no arguments here. For me and for my money, I think the next track, Escape, is probably the weakest on the album. Not that it's a bad song. It just has a bit of a different feel as compared with the rest of the album. And the chorus is almost happy in a way, and a little less angst-filled, I guess is the way I would describe it. It almost reminds me of a song that would come out a year later, and that's Wasted Years by Iron Maiden. Now, I'm not saying it's the same song, but just the way that it's kind of happy and a little bit different than the rest of the album that it's on. A unique approach. It's the verses are a little vanilla, a little plain to me. The chorus has a bit of a different feel, but there's just something out of place here. And part of me wonders if it was like the last song written for the album and they just kind of threw it on to fill out side B. I don't know. Again, not a bad song, just a different feel from the rest of the album.
And you know what? That's what I like about it. I feel like it yeah, like when I mentioned before about like there being more melodic portions, like this chorus of this song was what I was speaking of specifically. It just has, it feels like a song instead of just a thrash song. Like if that makes any sense, like it has more of like a, you know, something you might hear on the radio kind of vibe to it. And that's why I think I like this song a bit more than Trapped Under Ice, just because it felt like they were trying to be a little bit more musical. If that makes any sense. I think it's a kind of a cool song, and you're right. Like it does have a little bit more of like a glimmer of hope than the rest of the album, I guess.
As opposed to going to the electric chair. I mean,
yeah.
Go figure.
Exactly. This is the escape from the electric chair, I suppose. Before they catch you and strap you back down and death comes creeping. But I thought this was kind of a cool track. I mean, like, I think that also I think it's good to put this in between Trapped Under Ice and Creeping Death, because those are two like really, really fast and heavy songs. So it kind of gives you like a little bit of a reprieve instead of like mauling you to death with speed. But I mean, oh man, Creeping Death, this was very close to being my song of the week. It's I had it just a shade, just an eyelash behind For Whom the Bell Tolls, but this song is unbelievable, and now whenever I hear it, I just think of when Lorde finished their set at Prague Power by covering this, and I was like, oh my god, what a great song to cover. Of like all the Metallica songs, this is just one of those songs that live, it just has so much energy and it just pulls you in. It's really just an incredible song.
I could not agree more, and this was another song that really just kind of made me fall in love with metal. And the song holds up. I mean, just listening to it, it's almost 40 years, but like it holds up so well. The verses are great. The chorus is great. And like you said, it is a song that was made for the live setting. That iconic chant in the middle, you know, where he's like, die by my hand. So powerful. It's so, the riff is just so simple, but so effective. And it's a very digestible song for what's otherwise like this iconic thrash metal song. It's perfect. And I got to be honest with you, it was, if I had to pick a second song of the week, this would be it. And I'd probably find some live version on some bootleg and I'd put it up there because it's great on the album. It is perfect live. And I think more than anything, this whole experience this week has made me want to go see them again, because I saw them with you in 1998, and then I went to go see they played an S&M show at Madison Square Garden, where I got to hear the Call of Cthulhu live, which is the last track on the album, the epic instrumental. And that song was, I believe, what they opened with at the S&M show, which was ridiculous because you never considered it as like an opening track, but it was so good. And that track was so awesome that I'm like dying to see this band live again. It's been over 20 years since I've seen them. And I feel like that next time they come back, I need to make a point of going, just because if you look at the set lists, they sprinkle in some new stuff, but for the most part, it is a greatest hit set from those first 5 albums. And rightfully so. It's phenomenal. I think the Call of Cthulhu is a really ambitious way to end the album. It's very proggy, you know, which is not something you were hearing in 1984. And even though it feels kind of long, and it's not necessarily in a bad way. It's just a very dynamic closing track.
I love that. Like, I don't think I really realized that there is no vocals on the song until I listened to it this past week. But this is where you really get to hear Cliff Burton shine, I feel like, because without the vocals, you can really kind of hear that bass line shine through. But yeah, I agree. Like, this is a very ambitious, an almost 9-minute instrumental track to end like this classic thrash metal album. I was expecting to kind of find this to be boring, but I ended up really liking it. A really cool way to kind of finish things off, and Yeah, this was just, I don't know that I have anything much else to add from what you had to say, but just a great way to kind of cap off a really enjoyable album.
Scale of 1 to 10. How high are you giving this album?
I will give it a 8.25. I don't know that I would say it's my favorite Metallica album, but I do like it a lot more than I did before you asked me to listen to it. So I will say
Very
that
good score.
it was a very enjoyable experience. I think if there were more songs on the level of For Whom the Bell Tolls and Creeping Death, it would be more into that like nine-ish kind of air. But I mean, it's still a really, really good album, and I'd really like to do deep dives, especially on Master of Puppets and then Justice for All, because again, it's kind of the same thing for me where there's songs that I know really well, and then there's songs I don't know well at all. It's I'm like kind of like that Metallica fan who knows like the 50% most popular songs and then know nothing about the 50% least popular songs. So I definitely have some work to do in that area, and I don't know Kill 'Em All well either. So I mean,
That's another
all
one we have to do.
yeah. So
We'll
all
definitely circle back.
yeah. But I don't know. I'd be curious to say at the end of the day, once I'm familiar with everything, where this album would rank for me. I'd be curious to hear where it ranks for you. But how about you? What was your ranking, and where does this album lie on the greatest Metallica albums chart for you?
For me, it's probably it's not their best per se, but I think it's my favorite, and I'd give it a 9. I think it's really, really close to being just a perfect album. Again, not that I'm listening to much Metallica, but I also want to go back and do a deep dive into some of these to see how they hold up. I acknowledge it might not be the most polished or the best songwriting in their entire catalog. I think songs like One are just perfect songs in a sense. You're going to make the same argument about a song like Master of Puppets or I happen to be a big fan of Disposable Heroes off Puppets and stuff like that, which if you don't know that song, again, all the more reason to cover it. But like, I just something about the rawness, which I mentioned earlier, and the young Hetfield that just really grabs me. So for me, it's a 9. And it's probably my favorite. And if you said go grab a Metallica album, this would be the one that I would go play. Although I acknowledge it's probably not their best, if that makes sense.
I totally understand.
A couple of things before we get to next week and our request. Number one, after 28 years with the band, Steve Morse has finally left Deep Purple. He is leaving to take care of his wife, who is very, very ill. And it's funny, I saw Steve Morse play one of those G3 shows with, I believe it was Steve Vai and John Petrucci. I saw them, I think, one or two times on one of those G3 tours, probably like 20 years ago. Great guitar player. Have to do a show on Deep Purple sometime soon, just because
Definitely.
we did Sabbath. That this would be the next logical extension. So I wanted to mention that, and also in what has to be one of the most polarizing announcements I have ever seen. It seems as though Pantera is getting back together and going to do a run of live shows. Obviously, without two of their founding members with the Abbott brothers, it seems that Zach Wilde will be playing guitar and Charlie Benante from Anthrax, your boy from Anthrax, will be joining them on drums. An interesting lineup, but this is getting a lot of flack. I do not claim to be a Pantera fanboy. I know songs. I don't know albums at all. I know that they have a diehard fan base. I know that Phil Anselmo, the singer, has made some inflammatory remarks, which is probably the reason I've decided not to even pay any attention to them in the last few years, let alone before that. Do you have any thoughts on this, or one way or another, or is it just more of an interesting cash grab more than anything else?
Yeah, I don't care. I never got into Pantera. When I heard about some of the things that some of the members of the band had said over the years, it made me less inclined to listen to them. It's not really anything that I could care about one way or the other. Like,
Totally.
I think it's unnecessary. I think like the idea of doing it without two of the like most important members of the band seem kind of it's almost like doing a Led Zeppelin reunion tour without Page and Plant. Like, why
Right.
bother?
Right. I tend to agree. I mean, no disrespect to obviously the talented guys that are coming in to fill out the lineup, but something doesn't sit well with me and I won't be going to see it. Maybe it pays to do a Pantera show at some point just to kind of hear what it is we're missing, but I have a feeling I'm not going to fall in love with it. I mean, I'll be honest with you, they have one or two songs that I really, really enjoy, but despite my enjoyment for those songs, I never bothered to check out the albums they were on. So maybe that should tell you something.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I think Walk might be the only song I'm familiar with, and that's because it was Rob Van Dam's theme music in ECW. So that's about the extent of my knowledge. But yeah, it just wasn't, and it was something that just never really crossed my mind that it was something I wanted to delve into. So, I mean,
Yeah.
I'd be happy to do it for, an episode of the podcast just to see what's going on. But, yeah, I just thought it was interesting. I was kind of surprised to see that announcement because it just didn't seem like it was something anybody really was asking for.
Yeah, let sleeping dogs lie, I guess. But here we are, Pantera back together. And that takes us to next week, which is obviously the first of the month of August, and that means request time. And we're going to cover Fear Factory's Demanufacture from 1995, a band that I don't think you have much of any familiarity with, and quite frankly, a band that I never paid any attention to either. I've heard one or two albums at some point, and then here comes Demanufacture, which many say is their best album, a concept album which about man's struggles against the machine-controlled government. So we'll get to that next week. I'm very curious to see what you think of this. I gave it a listen, and I'm very curious to see what you think of it next week.
Yeah, I have. Boy, I know less about this band than I did about Pantera. I don't think I don't know even one song. I don't know what this band really sounds like. I just know that it's kind of industrial. So I'm going to give it a listen with open ears. But yeah, I enjoy these. I especially enjoy these episodes where the both of us are kind of in the dark starting out, and seeing where we kind of land. But hey, like, I ended up enjoying an Overkill album, so anything's possible here at the Metal Exchange.
I like it. It should be good. You'll come back the following week with a song, or I should say an album of yours. And thanks everyone for the positive feedback. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you next week when the Metal Exchange goes industrial with Demanufacture. Enjoy the week, bud. I will talk to you soon.
You too. Take care.